There's a kind of feeling that's really hard to explain. It doesn't arrive in a clear way. It doesn't need a specific reason to show up. It just happens. A name suddenly crossing your mind. A memory you thought had long been closed. A very small moment. But somehow, everything inside you gently shifts. You're not looking for it. And yet, in some way, it still finds its way back. And what makes it different isn't the intensity. It's the familiarity, like you've been here before. You've felt this before. You just never paused long enough to understand what it really was. You know, as you grow a little older, you start to notice something. Not every connection needs to be defined, and not every relationship needs a clear ending. But there are still things that stay, in their own quiet way. And if you've ever felt something like that, a connection that never truly left, then maybe today's story will touch you in a way that feels strangely familiar. Maybe you've felt this before in a very gentle way. There are no clear signs to name it, no dramatic moment that makes you stop and say, this is it. Everything happens much more quietly. A brief passing in a crowded place, a glance that doesn't last very long, a conversation that seems ordinary, yet leaves behind something hard to explain. And then, time moves on. Life keeps opening new paths. You meet other people. You learn to adapt, to grow, and slowly, you get used to things that once felt closed. But then, at a moment you don't expect, that person appears again. Maybe just a small coincidence, a quick crossing of paths, a name mentioned in passing, or simply a memory returning on a very ordinary afternoon. And in that exact moment, you recognize it. Not the kind of recognition that comes from thinking, not the kind where you analyze, who is this? What happened? Why does it matter? It's a feeling that arrives before your mind can catch up, as if your body already knows before you understand, as if a part of you never really left that place. The feeling isn't loud, it doesn't take over you, but it's deep enough to make you pause, just for a moment, and quietly wonder, why do I still recognize this person, even after everything has changed? And maybe what's most remarkable is this: you don't have to try. You don't have to search through old memories. You don't have to piece together fragments of the past. Everything reconnects on its own, as if it was never truly separated. Like an old road you haven't walked in years. But when you return, your feet still remember the way. And in that very still moment, you begin to understand something. Not completely clear, but enough to reach somewhere deep inside you. That there are connections that don't need to be held tightly and still remain. They don't need a name and still carry meaning. They don't need to be proven and still exist in their own way. And maybe what matters isn't what you're supposed to do with this feeling, but simply allowing yourself to feel it honestly. Because in a world where everything needs to be defined, confirmed, placed into something clear and structured, being able to recognize someone through nothing but a deep feeling, maybe that alone is already something beautiful. And then, when you step back a little and look at your journey like you're looking through a fogged-up window, you begin to notice something strange. Not every relationship moves in a straight line. Some people come in, leave a mark, and then walk away. Very clearly, very completely. You understand why they came, and you understand why they left. But there are also connections that don't work that way. They don't truly disappear. They just move further back, like the tide pulling away. You look out, and it feels like the ocean has left the shore, but underneath it all, the water is still there. It's just not right in front of you anymore. You continue with your life. You move through different seasons. You change, and so do they. And after enough time passes, it starts to feel like everything is closed. No more messages, no more intersections, no more reason to think about each other every day, until a very ordinary moment happens. No warning, no drama, just two currents quietly crossing again. Maybe you pass by each other in a place that feels both familiar and new. Maybe someone mentions their name, or simply, a memory returns at a time you didn't expect. And the moment it does, you realize something. That feeling hasn't changed. There's no need to start over, no need to get to know each other again. It's still there, intact in its own quiet way, like a book you closed a long time ago. And when you open it again, the page you left is exactly where it was. Nothing needs to be explained. No question really needs an answer. Just a quiet knowing that some connections in life don't follow ordinary logic. They don't need constant presence to exist. And maybe it's these gentle cycles, these soft returns, that teach you something deeper. Not everything that comes back is meant to begin again. Sometimes it returns just so you can see. It never truly left. You know, after all those returns, something in the way you see it begins to shift. It's no longer the question, why does this keep happening? It becomes a quiet feeling that something is moving beneath the surface without needing a name. People often talk about fate like it's something big, something obvious, something certain. But for Aquarius, it might be more subtle than that. No labels, no definitions, just a kind of resonance. Like two waves that don't need to see each other, but still meet on the same frequency. You could be far away, living a completely different life. You may have changed in so many ways. And yet, when that energy appears, you recognize it, not through memory, but through feeling. And here's what's interesting. Resonance doesn't ask for perfection. It doesn't need the right timing. It doesn't require everything to be ready. Sometimes two people meet while they're still becoming, still learning who they are, not finished, not fully understood. And then they separate. Not because something was wrong, just not in the same rhythm yet. But resonance doesn't disappear because of that. It's like a melody still playing very softly somewhere in the background. You might not hear it every day. Life gets loud. Other sounds take over. But then, at a certain moment, when things slow down, when you're quiet enough to listen, that melody returns, not loud, not rushing, just there. And maybe that's what makes Aquarius different. It's not about holding on to a connection. It's about allowing it to exist without trying to control it. You don't need to know where it's going. You don't need to force it into something specific. Just notice it when it appears and keep moving forward in your own steady way. Because when you look a little deeper, you begin to see not every connection comes to become a complete story. Some connections are simply part of your life's music. They don't have to play all the time. They don't have to be at the center. But without them, the song wouldn't feel the same. And maybe that quiet presence alone is enough to give that connection its meaning. And as you move a little further along your own journey, a question begins to stay with you a little longer than usual. Not loud, not urgent, just returning in very quiet moments. Why this person? Out of hundreds, thousands of encounters in a lifetime, why do some people just pass through while this one stays in such a different way? You may have tried to find the answer through reason, through logic, through what seems reasonable in the way adults often explain things. But then, the more you try to understand, the more it slips out of reach. And maybe, at some point, you begin to realize this story doesn't necessarily need a clear answer. Not every connection exists to reach a defined ending. Not every meeting is meant to become a labeled relationship. Some people come to stay, in ways that are easy to see. Some come to teach you something, and then leave once the lesson is complete. But there are also those who don't fit into any of those patterns. They're not entirely in the past, and then because they never truly disappeared. But they're not exactly the future either, because nothing guarantees they'll walk beside you in the chapters ahead. They just exist in a very specific place within you. They don't take up much space, but they can't be replaced, like a room you don't enter every day, but you always know it's still there. And whenever the door opens just a little, everything inside feels exactly the same. Nothing needs fixing, nothing needs completing. It just is. And maybe what's been unsettling you was never about something being unfinished. Maybe it's simply that you've never looked at it this way before, that there are connections that don't need to reach a destination to hold meaning. They don't need a name to stay. They don't need explanation to touch something very real inside you. And when you allow yourself to stop sorting everything, to stop forcing every feeling into something clear, you begin to feel lighter. No more pressure to understand. No more need to figure out what it all really is. Just accepting that it exists as part of your journey, like a pause in a piece of music. Not there to end something, not there to begin something, just there to remind you that at some point in your life, you truly touched someone, and they touched you in a way that went deep. And sometimes, that alone is enough to become a part of your story that can never be replaced. And then, at some point, you realize you're no longer chasing answers. You're no longer trying to piece everything together to understand. What does this mean? You're no longer asking, heck, where is this going? It's a very small shift, but enough to soften something inside you. You begin to loosen your grip, not the kind of letting go that tries to forget, but a gentler release, so you don't have to hold on so tightly. And in that moment, something becomes clearer. That connection no longer carries pressure. It doesn't need to be explained. It doesn't need a name. It doesn't need to become something specific. It just exists in its own way. Like the wind, you can't hold it in your hands, but you can still feel it as it passes by. You stop trying to hold on to the moments of return. You stop placing expectations on accidental encounters. It's just, if one day your paths cross again, you smile. A soft smile. No need to say much. No need to revisit the past. It's just, And if you never cross paths again, life still moves forward. You keep walking your path. You stay open to what's new. You learn how to live fully in the present. Nothing missing, nothing lost, just more at peace. And maybe, in that space, you begin to understand something deeper. Not everything meaningful needs to be held tightly. Some things, the more you try to hold on, the heavier they become. But when you let them be free, they stay in a much lighter way, like a beautiful memory. You don't need to revisit it every day, and yet it's still there, quietly supporting a part of you. Like an old song. You don't have to play it on repeat, but the moment you hear it again, everything feels the same. And maybe the most mature realization is not about understanding every connection. It's about learning how to live with it without letting it control you. You don't pull it closer. You don't push it away. You simply let it stay where it belongs. A part of your journey, a part of your story. Not bigger, not smaller, just enough. And in that quiet sense of enough, you begin to see. There are things in life you don't have to hold tightly, and they still won't disappear. In fact, it may be because you've stopped holding on so tightly that they're finally able to stay in the most natural and lasting way. A way that feels still, real, and free. And then, after you've moved through enough cycles, enough reunions, and quiet separations, a sense of calm begins to settle in. It's no longer the question, will this person stay? It's no longer the quiet worry, what am I supposed to do with this connection? It becomes something simpler. You look back, and notice something gentle. Maybe this story was never really about holding someone. Maybe it was about who once entered your life and touched you in a way you can't forget. Not because they were perfect, not because everything unfolded the way you expected, but because, at some point, you truly opened your heart. You felt everything deeply, honestly, without holding back. And that doesn't happen all the time in life. So when it does, even if it only happens once, it can stay with you for a very long time. And maybe that's why some connections keep returning, not to begin again, not to continue an unfinished story, but like a very quiet reminder that you once lived fully in a certain moment, that you once allowed yourself to feel without needing to know how it would end. Like a streak of light crossing the night sky. It doesn't last long, but it's enough to remind you that the sky was once that bright. And when you start to see it this way, something inside you softens. You stop trying to pull the past into the present. You stop fearing that if you let go, everything will disappear, because you understand what truly matters isn't how long something lasts. It's how deeply it touched you. And if you're still here, listening, maybe There's someone coming to mind right now. You don't have to do anything, just sit with that feeling for a moment. If it brings warmth, let it stay as something gentle you keep for yourself. And if it feels a little heavy, that's okay too. You don't have to understand it all at once. Everyone has their own way of moving through connections like this, and so do you. You always have the right to choose how your story continues, not based on someone else's expectations, not based on a fixed script, but in your own rhythm. Slow down when you need to, open your heart when you're ready, and keep walking in a way that feels most true to you. Because in the end, what remains isn't who stayed, but who you've become through every moment of holding on and letting go.